Oh. Still go with it?
No, it's fine. Once I turn it on, it'll be good. So, just a brief note of housekeeping. I am videoing this, and I'll post it on YouTube. I won't post it on Facebook. Facebook doesn't keep it for very long, but YouTube will keep it forever. So if you want to see this again, or if you know someone who would like to see it, just let me know. I can give you the link for that. But I will video those things, and if the phone doesn't crash and burn, it'll be okay. If it doesn't, we'll figure something else out. Another means of housekeeping is Kimberly handed out a thing I put together for everybody. If you want it, you can keep it. If you don't, give it back to me. I pretty much just put together a summary of each chapter very briefly. So if you don't have the book, you ought to be able to look at that and say, oh, okay, I've got a general idea of what these chapters are talking about. So that when I'm going through my little talk about things, you can at least track somewhat with what's going on. There is some discussion questions we'll pull up at the end of each session there just to kind of help solidify some things. But if you need a copy of that, let me know. I can get my USB drive to Kimberly and she can make some more, but I think we have enough. And then number 3, if you're interested in a book in any way, Beth has the information for that. But this is the book. It's called The Trellis and the Vine, The Ministry Mind Shift That Changes Everything. And it's a fairly old book, but it's a really good book. Highly recommended. Many people have read it, and it sat on my shelf. I read it many years ago, and someone brought it up to me a few months back, and I was like, oh yeah, I've got that book. And so I pulled it out and started to read it again, and pretty good. So I think it's worthwhile to walk through, and that's what we'll do over the next 6 weeks. We'll go through chapters 1 and 2 tonight. Next week will be chapters 3 and 4. And next week, Bobby's going to be facilitating for me. He's going to be doing the prayer requests and whatnot, but I will video myself ahead of time and play that, and then he'll do the questions at the end. So don't throw any rotten tomatoes at Bob, but he's just filling in for me.
This is available on Amazon, both in print and in
It's big book. It's not big in terms of length, but it's just a really good book that's out there. So it's been around for a long time, and it's going to stay around for a long time. But it's a good one, and so I think it's worthwhile. It's called The Trellis and the Vine. And so the first question I want to just toss off out there to see what you guys.
Real quick, Doug.
Sure.
If y'all do throw tomatoes at me, I like green.
Green. Love it, likes green. So this book is going to address the need for a mind shift in ministry. But in order for us to get there, we kind of have to ask ourselves this question. And the question is what is the actual purpose of ministry? I'm asking you right now, tell me what you want, throw out there anything you want, it's fine. What is the purpose of a church? Why are we here? To win people to Christ. What was that, Mr. Dennis? To make disciples, right? He actually beat you. Woo, Mr. Dennis. He's surprised. But, you know, the purpose of ministry, the purpose of the church, the focus of any organized ministry is to make disciples. Now, you're right also that you've got to get somebody saved first before they can become a disciple. Someone's not going to follow Jesus if they don't know him as a Lord and Savior. So we are to make disciples. Now, here's the thing. Many churches have lost sight of that for whatever reasons. And so in this book, they start off with an illustration of a gardener. Now who here likes to garden? Anyone like plant flowers, garden in the back or whatever?
Oh, no tomatoes.
Nobody? So no tomatoes next week?
Oh, she's not.
But we understand, right, what a gardener does, right? You know, a gardener does what? Plant something in the ground and hope they grow, right? They cultivate it, they fertilize it, they water it, they hope it grows, right? And a lot of times what gardeners will do, especially if you have tomato plants, is to erect a trellis. Or maybe you have a really pretty flower in your flower bed and that's a vine and you really want that vine to show off and to exhibit its beauty. You would you would build a trellis, put that trellis there, and as that vine grows, and it's going to grow up that trellis, and what happens with the vine? Everybody drives by and says, oh, look, Laura's got a beautiful whatever in her yard. Right? Now, would Laura be able to show off that vine without that trellis? Probably not. Right?
You wouldn't see it anyway.
You wouldn't see it. She lives up on top of a hill. But if she lived down by the road, people would they be able to see it if it didn't have some structure to hold it up? Most likely not. So the trellis is helpful, right? The trellis is helpful in that it gives structure, it gives a foundation for this vine to grow on. But here's the question: where does the gardener need to keep his attention? On the trellis or on the vine? On the vine. Why?
Because you have to make sure that it's getting enough water.
Right.
That's the one that's alive.
Yeah. If you water the trellis, it ain't going to change at all, is it? If you water the vine, take care of the vine, it will change, it'll grow. So let's talk about the vine for a few minutes. They use the vine metaphor here for a specific reason in this book. Vine work is the actual work of the church, as Dennis said. We want to make disciples. Now, think about vine work for a minute. If someone has, if someone is familiar with John 15, what does Jesus talk about in John 15? I am the vine, and you are the branches. Anyone who abides in me bears fruit. Anyone who doesn't, what? Dies, right? So Jesus is talking about abiding in him as part of the vine. Matthew 28:16-20 is the Great Commission. Anyone know what the Great Commission says in a roundabout way? Wow. Jesus, before he goes back to heaven, right, he's standing on the mountain and he's talking to his disciples, and his final words to them is a Great Commission. And what does he tell them? Yeah, he's like, go into all the worlds, beginning in Jerusalem, Judea, and the uttermost parts of the world, and do what? Make disciples, teaching them, baptizing them, and teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. So part of what Bev said is true. You want to see people get saved, and Dennis was also true when he came into the back and says, you want people to learn what it means to follow Christ. That's the whole kit and caboodle, right? It is the whole part of making disciples. So that is the vine work that we see in the church. And so, and that's why the Great Commission is so important, because vine work is not just something that happens on its own. You're not going to be able to sit there and just say, well, that's a pretty plant. It's going to do okay if I do nothing to it, right? You've got to do something to it. And that's why Jesus in the Great Commission is talking about go and teach, right? Those are two imperatives, right? Those are two things where we are to do. Because if we're not going, if we're not teaching, we're not helping people be connected to the vine. And Jesus says, if you're connected to the vine, what's going to happen? You're going to bear much fruit. So what does trellis work in a church then? Because every church has both. Every church has trellis, and every church has vine work. If the vine is the spiritual growth in the church, it's the seeing people get saved, it's the making disciples, what is trellis work then? And think about what a trellis does. Supports, right? So what would be an example of trellis work in a church? Think the word support. What is a support to the ministry? What supports ministry? Resources, right? You got to have money to pay for things, right? You got to have people who are willing to serve in things, right? If you want to see someone grow in their faith, you would encourage them to come to Sunday school, right? So Sunday school would be a trellis. What about Wednesday night? Even tonight, this is kind of a combination of vine work and trellis work. But think about our leadership meetings. What are they about? Support, right? Support stuff. Those are trellis work things. So we've got vine work and we've got trellis work. Now the problem that happens over time in churches is that we gradually drift to one or the other. Now, who do you think we drift most to? Trellis, right? We drift more to trellis work rather than the vine. And the question is why? Why do we do that? Easy. I was getting ready to say, don't give me the Sunday school answer, but that's it. It's easy, right?
It doesn't cost so much of your time.
Well, it costs of your time, but it's more in your comfort zone, right? So like Joe said, it's easier, you know.
Going out there soul winning, that's a hard process.
Yeah.
I mean, 'cause you don't know what you're facing. You don't know why. Like, I used to do two different visitation.
Yeah.
People throw the door at you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't know. So it's you have to pray before you walk and knock
Yeah.
on people's door.
Yeah, well, but it's easier to come and talk about a budget, for instance, right? Oh, well, the church has, this is what we did last year, and this is what we're doing this year, and this is, you know, all the budget items come into play. But it's a lot harder to go and talk to someone about Jesus, because oftentimes the question is this, is what if they ask me a hard question, right? Or what if they do something else, or what, it's always the what ifs, right? Or even in church, it's like, well, if I'm going to teach a Sunday school class, what if a little child does something that I don't know the answer to? You know, there's always that kind of like, it puts you outside of your comfort zone. And so really kind of what happens over time is that the churches drift into this mindset of, well, it's the pastor and maybe a select few who are to focus on the vine work. And so that happens on Sunday morning, right? And that happens on Wednesday evenings. You know, so we say, well, it's the pastor that's got to take care of the vine work, and I'm going to let him do it, or it's the elders that got to take care of the vine work, so I'm going to let them do it. But what's the problem? What are they also over? The trellis, right? You know, they're over the trellis work as well. So, you know, so we can see that, you know, trellis work takes over more frequently because it's easier and it's less personally threatening. And you can say, well, you know, ultimately, why is it less threatening to do trellis work? I gave some hints, but what else could be a reason that trellis work is easier?
Big conflicts. It's been conflicts.
So there's many conflicts, right? It could also be, in some ways, there's a quicker return on trellis work. You know, think about, I'm trying to think of a good example here. If we voted tonight to change the color of the carpet and we did so by Sunday, how much of a reaction would that be on Sunday morning? Oh my goodness, it's not red anymore, it's green. That'd be a fast return, wouldn't it? But what if we took the night to really start praying about souls to get saved and saying, we're going to go out in the community and start knocking on door-to-doors and witnessing to people? We would hope to see stuff on Sunday, but what if we didn't? It might take a little while, right, Joe? So there's a quicker return on trellis work. It's less threatening. It's more satisfying in some way. But you know, trellis work can, on the outset, be more impressive. You know, they say this on pages 9 through 10, I'm going to quote them. Trellis work also looks more impressive than vine work. It's more visible and structural. We can point to something tangible. We can point to a committee or an event or a program or a budget or an infrastructure and say that we have achieved something. Right? You know, Bev, Dennis, and I and Mike meet once a year to discuss budget. We literally could walk away from that budget meeting and say, man, we have accomplished something by getting the budget, right? And rightly so, right? That's not vine work though, right? So that it could be something like that. You know, I think of a great example of trellis work is to be the steeple, right? Steeple's getting built out back, praise the Lord, hallelujah, right? But what is it really? It's trellis work, because what does the steeple do for the church? It is a symbol for the community, right? It is a structure that we can look at that supports the church. It lets people know that we're a church, right? So the steeple is an example of trellis work. Now, what happens if we become too wrapped up in the steeple? Hypothetically, if we were to become too wrapped up in the steeple and move away from the vine work, how does that become a weakness to the vine?
Getting away from what's important.
Yeah. Yeah, what if someone were to say, and I'm not saying that they have, but think about this. What if someone were to say, thank God we got a steeple back, now we're really a church? What's wrong with that statement? You were always a church.
The building is not the church.
Right. What's the steeple got to do with it? But there is some who might have that mindset, right? You know,
It just makes the church look.
yeah. Because think about it. How long did it take for that steeple to get to where it's at today? Years.
I think it went down in July of 24.
Yeah, but how long prior to that? Because when I came here and I was talking to Lindsay about the steeple, you know what Lindsay told me? He said the best thing that happened to that thing is if it just fell off. I was like, okay, I can sense a little frustration there. So obviously he's dealt with it for a while. You know, maybe, but the steeple does not define the church as a church. The Great Commission and the fulfillment of the Great Commission defines a church as being a church, right? You know, a church's mission is to see souls saved and people discipled. You know, the steeple points to people in the community and says, hey, look, this is a church right here. But when people come here, they need to see the Great Commission being fulfilled here to understand, hey, it's really a church. You know, the fixing the steeple doesn't put us closer to God at all. What puts us closer to God is listening to what He's telling us to do and following through with that. So, you know, there again, let's come back to the Great Commission. How is making disciples vine work? How is taking the time to invest in somebody's life? Let's say me and Joe are meeting once a week to have personal Bible study one-on-one, and we're praying together and we're studying through the book of James, for example, and I'm pouring into Joe and Joe is pouring into me, and I am helping him to understand more what it means to be a disciple of Christ. How does that vine work? It's growth, but who's the growth in? It's in both of us, right?
Right.
You know, I'm sharpening him, Joe's sharpening me. You know, we're coming to a greater understanding of what God is asking of us, and we're working through James together. And the hope would be is that as Joe comes out of that time together, that he knows, man, Pastor's poured into me. I need to do what? Pour into somebody else. Share the gospel. Teach someone, right? Walk through that with them. And you see how that works, how the vine grows a little bit through that. So there again, what is the task that Jesus has for us? To go and to make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. You know, how does vine work complete that? It does all the way up and down, doesn't it? It's called just leading to growth. Now, here's an interesting thought. How many churches do you think today? This is just a opinion question. How many churches today do you think feel that a missionary is the only one who does Great Commission work?
A lot.
A lot. So what they might say is something like this. Well, yeah, we support the Great Commission because we give the Lottie Moon. What's wrong with that statement?
Lottie Moon's not the only thing.
Right? Lottie Moon's not the only thing for making disciples, right? For seeing people get saved. You know.
Maybe for that church it is.
Yeah, it might be.
I mean, because maybe they're not preaching the word of God.
Yeah. Yeah,
They
and
understand what they need to do, but they're not doing it.
yeah. Well, what they've done is they've shifted the onus of the burden onto someone who's overseas without taking on that burden themselves for the local people that's around them. And what's wrong with that thought? What's wrong with that thought? What's wrong with the thought of putting that burden on somebody else?
God put it on all of us.
Huh?
I said, God put it on all of us.
God put it on all of us, right? He wants us to be a witness. Remember what the Great Commission says? Go into all, he's starting where? Jerusalem. What is Jerusalem significant with? That's your neighborhood. That's your city. That's your town. That's your workplace. Go into Jerusalem, and then Judea. Judea is the whole countryside surrounding Jerusalem. So what would that be for us? Be our town, our neighborhood, our city. You know, and then it goes into the uttermost parts of the world. And it's the uttermost parts of the world means what? Everywhere. Right? So you know, the Great Commission talks about, you know, we are to go, right? You know, we are to go. And the emphasis behind the Great Commission, I want you to understand this. The emphasis behind the Great Commission is that, you know, it's not like Jesus comes up to Bev and says, well, Bev, if you want to go, you can. the choice is up to you. Is that how Jesus framed it when he said to the disciples? No. How did he say it to the disciples? Yeah, he's basically saying, he's not giving it to them as an option. He's saying it to them as if they're already in the process of going. Like he's saying this, as you go, do this, right? You're already on the move. So that leads to the question, do you have to be a missionary to fulfill the Great Commission? No. You don't have to only be a missionary to be a Great Commission. Here's another question. Is the authority of Jesus limited to only the mission field? So do we say things like this? God wants us to see people saved. He wants people to be discipled and baptized and all of that. And that happens out in the mission field. So therefore, God's authority only rests in the mission field. We'd have to say what? No. Where does his authority lie at?
In every church.
To the uttermost parts of the world, right? It's everywhere, right? Like I said earlier, can we say that we're being faithful to the Great Commission by only giving the Lottie Moon? No. And Jimmy gave the right answer. He goes, because there's other ways of doing it too.
That's just like it being that you're the only one in here that can, like make disciples of God, of anyone.
Yeah.
You're the only difference maker in the church.
And that's not true, right?
That's not true.
They say this on page 13. Jesus is the Lord and Master of my street, my neighbors, my suburb, my workmates, my family, my city, my nation, and yes, the whole world. We would not ever want to stop sending out missionaries to preach the gospel in places where it has yet to be heard, but we must also see disciple making as our central task in our homes and neighborhoods and churches. Because the reason is because he's called us to do it everywhere. Right? He's called us to do it everywhere. So the question we're left with is this. Are we as churches today making genuine disciples of Christ? Are we honestly seeking to be life changers in the lives of people, or are we satisfied only with getting a few people to fill the pews? And be honest.
I think it's the latter.
So Bobby says he thinks it's the latter. What else everyone think? Do you think churches today are more centered on, hey, I want to make disciples, or hey, if I can just get people in the door, I'm satisfied with that?
They're looking for membership.
Second one? Would you say that's the second one as well? Okay. So let's just get people in the pews, right? Let me ask you this question. What does church tradition have to do with that mindset? What is church tradition? I'm not talking about like the stuff handed down from the apostles. I'm talking about stuff that we generate over time ourselves. What does church tradition have to do with this mindset? Because think about it this way. Back up maybe 50 years. What was different 50 years ago versus now?
We were more centered in, about 50 years ago, we were more centered on God. We were more centered on bringing people in the church. And as time has evolved, things become more lax, seem more lax.
What was the mindset years ago? Like when we were all younger, at various stages of being younger, because we're all not the same age tonight. But when we were younger, what kind of emphasis did our parents put on church?
You better go.
You're at church. More importantly,
You're
what,
going.
what if a child act up in the service? Boy, you better mind your business. Whoop you when you get home, right?
It's like,
Oh, right there, the spot.
No, it didn't wait that long.
It happened to
Took
the
it right off
kid,
the bat.
right?
it was what Reverend Dempsey.
Well, I don't
He
know
said,
about
his issue when he was growing up was drugs. His mom drugged him in the church system, his mom drugged him in the church.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, we were in.
Yeah. What do you want to say, Joe? Oh, okay.
You know, it also depends where you live, right? Because
True.
and you come from Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Right? But my wife and I was out there this weekend, we were driving around, there's churches in place.
Yeah.
Right? And I was telling my wife, we got little churches around here.
And where's this at, down there in North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not only we got little churches down there, the radio has a lot of Christian stations,
Yeah.
right? And so no matter which station I changed, I think almost every other station,
Yeah.
it was a Christian station.
Yeah.
Well, it was kind of nice that you're driving, you're in North Carolina, and you stay with the Word of God. Oh, and by the way, in 95, it's a big sign that says, do you know Jesus? Right? And then you keep driving, and it said all those signs. And I was like, wow, this is kind of refreshing, right? Because those states doesn't allow you to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it also depends, and I think people getting more bold now about Jesus Christ. So to answer your question, a long time ago, you was a Christian, people respected you. Alright? Today, if you're a Christian, people think you're the devil, basically.
Yeah.
And they have this different mentality about what Christians should look like.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'll add to that a little bit because I still remember this day in my mind so clearly that there was a pastor friend of mine down in North Carolina that we were meeting to just encourage one another and such, and he lived 30 minutes away from me, and so between my house and his house was pretty much a straight road. I mean, as straight as you could get. And I remember driving to his church, and I'm like, church, church, church. And I counted 13 churches between my church and his church. And I was like, that's a 30-minute window of driving and 13 churches, like you said. But every single one of them was little itty-bitty churches. I mean,
correct.
small, little itty-bitty churches. And so the next thought that I had in my mind was, I wonder how many people go to this church on Sunday now compared to 50 years ago. Because the mindset 50 years ago was, hey, if the doors are open, this is where I'm going to be. Because the American dream was, what is the American dream? Anyone know what that is? What it used to be considered? You had the freedom to work, you had the, build wealth, all that stuff like that, and you had to be a Christian. That was kind of tied into the American dream, right? At least without saying it was. Today, that's not the same thing, is it? Because look at the churches today. Where's the people at? If you drive by every 13 churches I did down there, and I'm not recommending that you do, how many do you think you'll see in each parking lot on a given Sunday? You might see a lot in one, but primarily with them so close together in a 30-minute stretch on a straight road, there's probably not going to be very many. At one time there was enough to facilitate them to build another church, but today there's not very many. What's going on?
Well, cultures are changed, and I told everybody once, but when I was in Boston, I went to Harvard
Yeah.
University, I was looking for a church, and I found this night church. It was a gay church. I mean, I was sitting there, and they were preaching the word of God, and then I started looking, all the guys were calling each other and everything, and I got to get some coffee and cookies anyway for free. But I never went back, right? And they advised me, be careful because if the church has a rainbow flag, I mean, I didn't know that. And I was in shock. I didn't know those things existed. I mean, it's a whole bunch of Boston. I'm pretty sure big cities now is like that too.
One of them definitely burned to the ground
Really?
a year ago.
So,
But I was in shock.
But you got a lot of churches out there, a lot of Baptist churches out there, now changing from being St. Baptist to community.
yeah, because they don't want to associate with the Baptist name. They've got so much trash tied onto it now. So if you call themselves a community church, they're still Baptists whether they want to admit it or not. Their doctrines they believe in and all that, it's still Baptist doctrines. They just say we're a community church. So, they're trying to get away from that, because it carries such a bad connotation with it. Presbyterians will probably do the same thing for long, and Methodists and all them. We're just a community church. Are you really? What's your doctrine? It's like, oh, you're really Presbyterian. You're really Methodist. Because there's so much trash out in the world today.
And Catholics, they'll stay Catholics, they just change the rules.
That's right. So the error with tradition is not always that something has become entrenched. And what I mean by that, it's not like, we've become so set in our ways that, that's just what it is. It's that we've over time, we've shifted our focus. We've shifted our focus away from what the main task is. What is the main task for a church? Let's repeat that again. What are we supposed to do?
Make disciples.
Yes, see people get saved, make disciples. And so if we've lost our focus, we neglect the important elements in vine growth And when we neglect the important elements in vine growth, when we forget those things, why is it any wonder that we are here today going, where's everybody at? We're running in circles. Why aren't people coming to the church like they used to? Right? Yeah. You know, something's gotten in the way. So when we think about a healthy ministry, when we think about a ministry that is you know, to have a healthy ministry requires that we've changed the way that we think. Would you agree?
Yes.
We have to change the way that we think. So the authors of this book, they argue that many churches operate with a mindset of this, and I'm just going to quote them, how do we get more people to attend? Right? Cookies, coffee, different things, right? How do we get more people to darken the doorway of our church in the hopes that they'll want to stay, and therefore we can consider that to be church growth, which doesn't really work, does it? Really, the question ought to be, how do we help people grow as followers of Jesus? Which one is more vine work? The second one. How do we help people grow as followers of Jesus? And so there's a need for a ministry mind shift. That's what chapter 2 is talking about in this book. We need to understand what, this mindset, because here's the thing. If we become complacent, what does the word complacent mean? Anyone know? Satisfied.
You're satisfied.
I'm just satisfied with the status quo. So if we become complacent where we are at, then as a church, all we're doing is maintaining what we have, right? What happens with that mindset in 20 years?
You're still stuck in that.
You're still stuck.
In a row.
And then the people who have passed on in the 20 years, if they're not getting replaced, then
You got empty pews.
you got even more empty pews. And there was an article that came out a few years ago by the Gospel Coalition, and the title of the article caught my attention because it said this. It said, "Pastor, get ready for your church to shrink." And I thought, man, okay, let me read that. And it said this, that most churches in the United States today is made up of baby boomers. Why are the churches today made up of baby boomers? Who were the baby boomers? Anyone tell me who the baby boomers were?
That's who were going to church early on.
Yeah. These were the children of the men who came back from World War II. Men who saw the horrors of life, the depravity of men who were shooting other men, killing other men, and they came back and they said, we don't want the world to get to that place again, so we need to do something about it. So let's build communities, let's get married, let's have families, let's make community centers. Hey, let's build churches. And then let's go to these churches and drag our kids to these churches and teach them what it's like to follow Jesus. And so, man, they had a bunch of kids. That's why it's called the baby boomers, because they boomed with kids, right? So you've got all these kids who grew up, who are here today. And this article said, you know what? They're at retirement age. And they are. And he says, if they're stuck in the ministry mindset of just maintaining what they have, instead of growth, spiritual growth, as Jesus is talking about, in 20 years, what's going to happen when they're dead and gone? The baby boomers are the ones who's primarily funding your church, right? When they're dead and gone, what happens to that? It shrinks. You might not be able to pay your electric bill anymore. You might not be able to pay for VBS anymore, different things like that. When the baby boomers are gone and no one's filling the pew and no one's inviting people, what happens? Your numbers are shrink significantly, right? So there is the need for a ministry mindset shift, right? That there is the old ministry model. Let me see if I can find it here, because I made a note and apparently I didn't follow up with it. What do you think the old ministry model was?
Teaching, visiting, councils, organizes. Mostly, well, that's what the pastor does. Sorry.
That's the old ministry model, right? The old ministry model is this idea of we don't really have to do much. They'll show up, and then it's the pastor's job to take care of these things. What's the new ministry model? What would be the thing that Jesus wants of all of us?
Equipped to go out and find new disciples.
Right. The pastor equips, the elders equip, they're doing the job as well. They're going out and doing the same thing, but they're discipling others to go and do it with them. So the difference between the old ministry model and the new ministry model is there's a vast number of people more involved in the second one. So, can we grow spiritually as a church if our mindset is simply to maintain what we currently have? No, why not?
Because we're
It's not really
adding-
growth, is it?
We're really not adding to it.
Can someone give me the example of a maintenance mindset? What would it be a maintenance mindset in the church?
Just to be like where we're at right now. And just
We're
hold
just
on,
being-
and just holding steady as long as, and look, he counted 65 people this past Sunday, which is
Yeah.
great. But we're relatively between 45 and 50, 52 people. And just as long as we're staying right there, as long as
Yeah.
we're staying right there, we're going. But
Did you have one, Debbie? Or someone say something. I don't know.
Well, we're just maintaining
Yeah.
the steady flow. We're just doing the same thing over and over.
So
Yeah.
you don't really see 65 people in here, and see that side filled up a little bit more this past Sunday was fantastic. And if we could keep that growing and keep that going in that aspect, and say we had 65 coming Sunday, well, that's showing a growth, an incline, not a decline.
Yeah. The book gives 10 examples I want to share with you. So the first one's going to be a maintenance mindset. The second one's going to be a growth mindset. So the first one is running programs. How is running programs a maintenance mindset versus building people, which is a growth mindset? Think about it.
Can you combine it?
Right.
You're inviting people to come, part of that.
If you put structure in place, right, Trellis, a program is a trellis, and you say, we're going to run the program and hope people just show up for it, right? Pastors doing the Bible study on Wednesday night, they're going to catch it in the bulletin and they're going to come because they see it in the bulletin, right? So that's not really growth, is it? That's more like just running a program. But building people is, all right, here's the people in the church. How do I build a ministry around them? How do I work a ministry that will build something with them? Scott and Debbie love disc golf. We're talking about building a ministry around disc golf. How great would that be? It's out there, right? Not here in the church, but it's out there. That's building people. That's a growth mindset. It's not a maintenance mode. So here's another one. Running events versus training people. This is what I'm just telling you what they say in the book. We run events hoping people will attend when more and more people are choosing not to attend. Right? We run things hoping that people are just going to show up when people don't choose to show up. But training people involves training them to speak the gospel wherever they're at. They don't have to be at the event. They could be somewhere in the grocery store, at John Foods, or wherever. And so you can speak into someone's life where you're right there. And then, once they learn how to do that, if you do have an event and those people who have been trained to speak the gospel are at the event and the people who do come, guess who gets to interact with those people? The people who've been trained to speak the gospel. Right? So you can combine those. But separate from that, one's just maintenance, one's growth. Using people versus growing people. The 10% doing the 90% of the work. Is that using people or growing people? That's using them, right? That's the ones who are, well, I'm willing to do this while the 90% doesn't. And unfortunately, that's the mindset of many churches. That's just a maintenance mindset. But if we could take the time to actually, if we could help to grow volunteers, if we can encourage them to step up to the plate, and help them to grow in the knowledge of the Lord and what He was having them to do, right? We can help them to understand that the service that they give is because of the love that Jesus has shown them. Do you think that would make a difference? I think so. Filling gaps or training new workers. Do we just want to, oh look, we have a gap to fill, just fill it with whoever? Or do we honestly want to take the time to say, you know what, maybe I need to train that person to be in that position. Maybe they're not gifted to be a children's worker. Maybe they're not gifted to be a certain whatever, but they're gifted to be something. So what is that? Do we just want to stick them in there, or do we actually want to train them for where God has gifted them to serve? I remember, it's a funny story, but I remember a pastor telling one time, he said he was in his church and he came in, and there was a sweet little lady who was the door greeter, and she was just standing there like this, and he said, everybody come by, she would just hand out a bulletin. She wasn't saying anything, and he's like, she's supposed to be greeting people. She's supposed to be talking to them. So he came up and he said, Laura, I'm just using your example. You don't do this, you do better, but I'm just using Laura's name. Laura, why aren't you greeting people? And her response was, I'm scared to death of them. And his first thought was, you know what? I don't think she's fitted for this role. But what was she fitted for? He said he found out that she loved children. And so he got her plugged into the nursery, and she loved it. She was back there serving and loving on those babies and giving the mamas a break from their kids, which they'd so desperately need. And he's like, that's where she needed to be. Someone took the wrong example and said, let me just put her at the door, it should be okay. She was scared to death. She wasn't doing what she should have done. Now Laura hugs people. She might give them a sucker one day. I don't know. She'll send them a card if she gives them the address. But so we don't want to just fill gaps. We want to figure out where they're gifted and train them for that. That's vine work, isn't it? It's helping them to grow. Now, here's a good one. Putting out fires or preventing fires? Is putting out fires maintenance, or preventing fires, is that growth?
You need to prevent them.
Yeah.
You don't want to find out you know God, and sometimes fire comes to you and you have to put it out.
That's true. You gotta put it out.
And fire's going to happen sometimes, right? But if we put the effort into preventing the fires, right? If we put the effort into training people and all the above, then we can honestly we can circumvent some of the problems. They talk about one of the examples is like solving problems versus making progress. Because sometimes, and this is what they said in the book, and I thought this is interesting. We don't want a ministry environment where people can only relate to each other by discussing their problems. Think about that. How you doing today? Oh, my back's been hurting all week. Oh, well, let me tell you about my knee. Do we ever get to the position where we say, how you doing today? Man, it's like a friend of mine used to say, I am blessed beyond what I deserve. And the first time he said that to me, I was like, do what? What? Because that was so out of the blue. But he said something that I wasn't expecting, right? So we want to be like, oh, okay, he was proactive. They say this on page 22. Let me read this. Ask yourself whether your ministries are reactive or proactive. If you are mostly reacting to people's problems, you won't have the energy to put into proactive training to grow new work. If you take a problem approach to ministry, people with the most critical needs will dominate your programs, and the needs will wear you out and exhaust you and reduce the effectiveness of the ministry as a whole. So in other words, if all you're constantly doing is dealing with problems, what's going to happen? You're going to burn out. Is that maintenance or is that growth? It's just maintenance, right? Here's number 6. Clinging to ordained ministry or developing team leadership. So what that means is clinging to ordained ministry says it's all the pastor's job. or the elder's job. Developing team leadership says, look, we work together as a body, right? Which one is maintenance and which one is growth?
Growth is number 2.
Growth is number 2. Team development, right? Leadership development that way. I'm going to skip one because I want to get through a little bit quicker. But, if we only focus on maintaining, how much time do we really have to invest in growth? Not much, do we? If we engage in only management, do we have time to engage in ministry? They said this in the book, we have a leadership team which should help divide up the administrative duties within the church. But if the team isn't functioning as it ought to, those things still need to get done. So who ends up doing that work? Right? Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to balance the budget. Someone's got to do the work of things around the church, right? Someone's got to paint the walls if something happens, or someone's got to do this, someone's got to do that. That's why we have a team with different people doing different functions. But the people on the team aren't doing what they're supposed to do in their respective areas. Someone's still got to do the work. Which one is maintenance and which one is growth? The team concept, right? So here's the last one. Seeking church growth versus gospel growth. All right, let me read this. We should seek to train people to share the gospel, engage with others, build relationships, instead of just merely filling a pew. Why is that so important? Why is it more important to engage in relationships with people, to share the gospel with people, to honestly build, to engage with others, versus just trying to get someone to sit in the pew on Sunday morning? Why is it so important to do one versus the other?
You stand a better chance of building a disciple.
You have a better chances of building a disciple, right? What else? If Joe feels engaged, if Joe feels like someone's reaching out to him and building a relationship with him, how much more likely is Joe to stay at that church? Huh? Okay. Versus someone who just comes in and sits down and no one says hi to him or whatever, and they just say, hey, I'm glad you're here, and that's it. That's all I hear.
Look how bold he was. He came in, he went to one church and it was closed. So he
That's
came
right.
in, and we've had him ever since.
Some
I hope that's it.
That's a good thing.
Well,
And the thing of it is, one thing that I see in this church is everybody's serious. Otherwise, it's one thing I keep pointing out ever since I've gone to becoming this church is that plaque right there that says this church has been up, not just the physical church itself, but Mount Olive Baptist Church has been a part of this community since 1833. So that's saying something about Mount Olive itself, and over the years that bringing out the gospel, making disciples, that it's carried. There's been bigger churches with a lot more money in it that have fallen to the wayside because of the fact they're not carrying God's word.
well, let's think of it this way. Numerical growth versus gospel growth. What does numerical growth do for a church? Does numerical growth wax and wane? It goes up and down. If it's rainy, people might not be there. If it's sunny, people might not be there. If it's windy outside, people might not be there. You know what I'm saying? It becomes very, I don't know what I'm looking for. It's very temperamental, right? Numerical growth, we could look at this past Sunday, for example, and say, man, what a wonderful thing. It was 65, 67 people here. That's great. And we can say, man, that's wonderful. And then when it comes to this Sunday, I hope it's still a high number, but what if there's only 45? Right? What happens to the victory from this past Sunday? Kind of goes out the window, doesn't it, a little bit, to say, well, where did they go? Where are they at? But what is so good about gospel growth? What is so good about seeing someone get it one day? You know, when you're going through a Bible lesson with them, or maybe you're having coffee with them, or dinner with them, or lunch with them, or whatever, and you're talking about something, and they're like, you know, I never thought about it that way before. That makes perfect sense. And you as a believer can look at them and you see the light bulb come on their head, and you say, you know what? They just took a little bit closer step to Jesus, right? What's better about that versus numerical growth?
Sustainability.
We have to be careful with
Yeah.
that mentality. We got 65, now we got 40. Maybe we got 65 and it's not a big deal, but that, maybe not 40 or 5 people,
Yeah.
we was able to get to that person and God worked that miracle to get that person safe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little cheap out of
Yeah.
the 65, right? Maybe those 65 they are safe when they complacent, right? But you have 40, maybe that one cheap is that 40.
Well, yeah, I'm not arguing with you about that.
You
That,
have
that,
to-
that is totally a possible thing. But how does gospel growth lead to numerical growth?
Well, the more you preach, the more the word spread out, the more people believe, and the
Yeah.
more people come.
Well, it's
So,
like-
you want to feel the kingdom, right?
Yeah, it's like this. If people learn to understand what the church is supposed to be, right?
You're false.
And they start acting as the church to other people in the church, or even out into the community, and people are looking at them and they're saying, you know what, there's something different about Mount Holly Baptist Church. I'm interested in that church. And they come back to that church and they're made to feel loved and made to feel welcome. They're growing, you know, they're establishing relationships and stuff like that. That's how numerical growth occurs. Other than just showing up on a Sunday and saying, hey, I'm glad you're here. I hope you come back next Sunday. And there they go. You know, so I mean, there is good things to have a lot of people on a particular Sunday. We pray that someone hears the gospel and gets saved. But when we're talking about numerical growth for a church, ultimately the foundation for that is gospel growth. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Gospel growth. So gospel growth is not maintenance mode. It's growing mode. But that falls to all of us, right? So I'll pick that up next week. But, you know, let me ask you a few questions. This is the discussion time, or if you want to call it that. You know, we've already talked about Trellis and Vine Works. I won't pick that. We've already talked about, you know, activities in church. Where do you think Vine Work happens the most in churches today? Where do you think Vine Work happens the most in churches today? Spiritual growth.
Bible study,
Bible study.
I mean, it's kind of a small group,
Yeah.
right? So you get to share a little more intimate God messages. You know, I'm still kind of concerned about big churches for the numbers, right? Because
Yeah.
I've been in big churches, and you get lost. You get lost. And then big churches also become little cliques on it. I mean, if I would have never came to this church because it's small, I would have never got to meet Laura, right? So
Well, look, explain what is the challenge with big churches?
you have to spread, and it's kind of hard sometimes to spread. I was going to a big church, and I was not part of this clique, right? Because that church had a school. My kid was not going to the school, so even though I was in church, even when I was there Sunday, Wednesday, yeah, but there was a lot of things going beyond that I was not part of, because I didn't have kids in the school, right? All my kids were growing up. I mean, it can be good, but it's also I like more churches myself. It's more intimate, and you get to know the people for who they are, the real people, right? It's not just you come in, hi, how you doing? I mean, I used to be an art show in a big church, and I wasn't scared, right? Like the Laura that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And I've got to be a lot of people walk in and walk out. I mean, it was always the same people that was in the church on Wednesday night. That's when you knew that was the core group. So,
Well, you hit on something there. What creates that revolving door? People walk in, and they say this in church, you know, they say this in seminary a lot, is you have people to come in the front door and they walk right out the back door. And we never see them go out the back door and they never come back. What creates that problem?
Because they didn't give anyone to welcome them.
Yeah, and then there was,
Relationships with people,
yeah, there was,
connectivity and having relationships.
It wasn't fulfilled with the word of God.
yeah, there's a lot of things that's there, right? You could come into the greatest church in the world as far as preaching goes, but if there's no connectivity there, they're gonna walk right out the back door.
The difficulty and challenge of a bigger church, something like Park Valley, when I've gone to, is the fact that there are so many people that are going to that church. Okay, there's only so much you as a pastor can feed so many people you can reach out to.
Right.
It's not just a Pastor Travis thing. It's a Den, it's a Elder Den, it's Elder Mike, it's Bobby, it's Joe, it's everybody. Reaching out to these people and helping
Yeah.
them grow.
Right, it's.
I don't know if anybody here been Catholic, I grew up in a Catholic church, right? But you go to a Catholic church, of course, you always got to throw in the coffee too, right? But in the bag. You know how that.
You know what they're trying to say.
No, but what I'm saying, you go to a Catholic church, you don't see, okay,
Every Sunday.
yeah. You don't see that same connection that you see in a Baptist church.
It's sterile.
Right.
There you go, that's the right word.
Sterile.
It's sterile. I mean, everybody go there, and all the churches preaching the same thing. You go through a ritual, right?
They go because they're supposed to go.
Exactly.
Right.
I did that. I went because I wasn't even saved. I went because my father told me I had to go to church. I got married, and I need to take my kids to church because I want my father saved. Now until I went to a Baptist church, where the pastor came running to me, maybe because I was new, I was like, wow, God talked to me, right? But he put the emphasis on me because I was new there. He saw me.
Yeah.
But I went to a Baptist church and the priest never saw me. Because he was for everybody.
Yeah.
So it's the church itself, and when I talk about the church, I talk about the people. They have to be involved, can only be the pastor. I remember I went to that Baptist church and it was like everybody knew me. Everybody wanted to give me a hug, everybody wanted to
Feed
talk
you.
to me.
Feed you.
They feed you, right? And it was a completely, you can feel God's presence.
Yeah.
So when and I'm not criticizing any church because I don't have the right to do that. But I don't remember going to any Catholic church my whole life until I got saved in a Baptist church that had that same feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, I did. And my wife was Catholic, my wife, she's German, so all the churches in Germany are Catholic, and they preach and whatever language they speak, they don't even speak German. So my wife went to church too, but she never knew what the priest was saying, right? This is a ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go in and you go out. That's what maybe, and I'm not saying maybe, but maybe some of this message also talking about this type of churches, right? But, I went to North Carolina, went to Cocoa Baptist Church. I mean, everybody was just like the way I'm talking about. Walk in, everybody, I thought they was trying to carry me and sit me down. I mean, okay, it's pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah.
but more churches, you can feel the love.
Yeah.
You can feel Christ. And
Well,
people are more real.
It's a balance between trellis and vine, because you need to have the trellis. You've got to have the structure. You've got to have something to support vine work. If it's not Sunday school, it should be small groups. If it's not small groups, it should be some sort of group of small people who can get together from the church and study the Bible together. We need to have Sunday morning, right? We got to have Sunday morning preaching. We should have those things, but it's part of a structure, right? So we got to have both of those. We can't have one without the other. The vine needs this trellis, but the trellis is no good without the vine. So, I remember Kimberly and I, the first time I had a preaching engagement, I was doing pulpit supply, and Ethan was a baby, and we drove out there, and I was scared to death because this is the first time I ever stood up in front of a group of people. And I'm sitting there preaching, and I'm looking through my notes, and I'm preaching, and at about 11:50, guess what I started hearing?
Time to go.
And I'm like, I'm not even done. And it dawned on me, like my professors were telling me, when you hear them do that, you're done. But why are you done? And they said most often it's because they're thinking about lunch before you're even done preaching.
But 2 weeks ago, you wasn't here, you had the pastor preaching, right? And I said, today, this morning, I can hear him will say, no, I belong to Jesus. Remember that?
No.
No, right? And I was in the bus this morning, 4:30 this morning, and I heard the voice in my head, no, I belong to Jesus. And I was just thinking, but you would never hear that in a Catholic church.
Yeah.
You would never hear that type of preaching.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I said, it was an impact. Just those simple words, right?
Yeah.
Say, no, I belong, I'm a child of Jesus. And I've been thinking about what he said. That song is sitting there.
Yep.
Very nice, telling the story, right?
No to Satan.
No, to Satan, I belong to Jesus. And I was thinking, like, what a powerful, simple message.
But
It's still 2 weeks later, it's still in my heart.
But here's the thing, in a church where the pastor's not even done preaching, what kind of message is being sent when you can hear, oh, the Bible's being shut, everything's zipped up, and it's like, oh yeah, he should have said, no, I belong to Jesus, but at 11:50, I belong to K&W. That's the problem,
No, that was the point I was trying to say.
right?
You have to receive Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, I'm still thinking about that. So I'm not closing my Bible, right?
Right.
But and I understand what you said to people closing the Bible because they didn't hear those words.
We were using it out on the disc golf course.
I said it.
Really? Right? And it was just
I
so,
just get a tree and no!
it was just so simple.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's a simple word, right? And it's just still stuck in my head.
Yeah.
As of today, right? And I don't think I ever going to forget that, right? Because it was very powerful.
See, they used to be using that as if every time you in church service.
You know, that's
I-
the point, yeah,
I
we
take
got
my
to church,
Bible,
we should do that.
And I'm sitting there doing that, I said, hey, look here.
Well, it's just the emphasis, right? The emphasis is if we're on maintenance only, right?
We're
What
not
kind of
getting- we're
what
not
kind of
getting
growth are
anywhere.
we going to experience?
We're not getting.
If we're, oh, it's 10 minutes to 12, I've got to get out the door because I got to be first in line. What's that telling everybody else who's there, right? I'm not so much concerned anymore about what's being taught, preached, whatever, you know, or you know, you can think any number of examples of those things.
But see,
If I come into a church and no one really welcomes me, then, you know, what kind of message is that sending to the people that's coming into the church? You know, if someone comes up to Jimmy here and says, hey, I've got a question, and can you answer this question for me? And Jimmy says, well, you know what? You need to talk to the pastor about that, which that's not a bad idea, but you would hope that eventually Jimmy would be able to answer that question himself, right? And eventually down the road, because that would show that it's not always the pastor's got to answer the hard questions and things. So there's got to be that balance with it there, but we got to shift out of that maintenance mode to the growth mode, or we won't see anything.
And then we leave the filling of the pews to God.
Right, we leave the filling of the pews to God. Because the mindset used to be, they're going to come as long as the doors are open. That's not the mindset now, at all.
We have to be intentional.
Yeah, we got to be intentional.
About reaching people.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to be the examples of the community. We've got to speak truth into people's lives. We've got to be that, you know, ambassador for Christ that we're called to be and such like that. So, you know, there's a lot that's involved in that. But
the thing of it is it doesn't hurt to run over during for church. You might be preaching for a 45-minute service, but then you add a few more things and man, some good ideas or something some good words come up, scripture or whatever, that make it an hour and 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Give you an extra 20 minutes, but you know what? You never know what that extra 20 minutes is going to do for little Eddie.
Yeah.
That's running around in there. But I mean, whoever, I mean, people, that 20 minutes, where people in that 45 minutes is getting shortchanged, hey, they're ready to take off, let's go.
yeah.
That other person could have used that 20 minutes that would have reached them, reached right in there and put God right into their heart.
Yeah. So what questions do you have before I close? Anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments?
It was a pretty good discussion. I would say that.
We have
I'm glad
5
to
more.
say. I got was good today because I mean, it makes me think. I mean, it's not the level of the service, it's the message itself.
Yeah.
And if you can't deliver the message from God, through God, to the people, you can speak all day long, people just gonna go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest point kinda is that we have allowed ourselves to shift into a different mindset that's occurred over time, over decades, and we've not realized that's what's happened. And so it's the wake-up call and saying, that's what's happened, we need to change that. Is that easy? No. Can it be done? Yes. Is it worthwhile? Yes. You know, and it has to happen, for all kinds of reasons. So any other thoughts, questions?
Well, and I think the importance too is to not necessarily make disciples within the walls of this church.
Yeah.
But to be in your community, wear the shirt that says something about Jesus in the grocery store. Maybe someone will stop and want to talk to you. But it's also being out in your community, in your comfort zones,
Out of your
to do
comfort
this.
zone. Yeah.
Or maybe we need to be out of your comfort.
Or, that's true, eventually you have to be out of your comfort zone to be a good disciple.
I'm blunt. I got my Bible, talk about that some work and say Bible for leadership, and I don't hesitate to tell people about it.
But discipleship is an ongoing thing if we're honestly engaging in it. It happens in so many different facets of our life. And so someone was asking me one time, he says, when do you think discipleship begins? Because we were discussing evangelism and discipleship as if they were two different entities. And I said, you know, I honestly believe discipleship begins the moment you approach somebody. Because the moment you approach somebody, they're watching you. You can tell them about Jesus all day long. You can, you know, we would love to have you come visit the church. You know, we can do whatever. But if they're looking at you and they're like, you know what? Maybe you're wearing a Megadeth shirt, or maybe you got a big old, what is those big beers? They have 1 liter beer cans or something like that in your hands, or, you know, 3 or 4 cigarettes in your mouth or whatever, and you're like, you know, Jesus loves you, you know, whatever. I'm going to the extremes here, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that person's going to look at you and say, yeah, right. I don't know that
You have to be a good model.
Yeah. The moment you engage somebody is when discipleship begins, because they're going to be looking at you. When they come to visit your church, they're going to be looking for you. I hope you're there that day, and they show up if you invited them. Because if they show up and you're not there, well, you know, someone invited you, they're not even here. Where are they at? They're at the lake. Oh.
Well, that happened to me coming to this church. Alright, and I went and told the person, you invited me to the church, I haven't seen you in church. How come you're not there?
Yeah.
Because I boss her out all the time.
Well, it's funny.